Hello everyone and welcome to this special webinar event focused on the tidal energy industry, where our special guest today will map out the path to the commercial deployment of tidal projects this 2019. I am Lindsay Coulson, Project Director at New Energy Update and the organiser of today's webinar, which has been produced in conjunction with the International Tidal Energy Summit 2019. The International Tidal Energy Summit 2019, or ITES 2019, is an event which is taking place in London on November the 11th this year and will bring together 120 dedicated tidal energy leaders, including our brilliant speakers today. Early bird savings end Friday the 20th of September, where you can save £200 off your pass. So do visit the website on your screen to claim this discount, or feel free to contact me directly if you have any questions at all. Just to quickly outline the format of today's webinar, we'll first hear from Drew Blacksand on CIMEC Atlantis' latest project update, followed by Marlene Moutel of Sabella. We will then have group discussion time with Andrew Smith of Deja Blue Consulting and Christoph Harwood of Simply Blue Energy. We will now start the webinar with a brief introduction from Andrew, moving swiftly into our first presentation from Drew. I do hope you enjoy this session.
We'd very much encourage you to please send in your questions. As has been indicated, we don't want to just be talking to ourselves. So we'll get to as many of those questions as we can, and certainly would encourage you to think about attending the ITES event, 11th November, London. It's a great place to meet the whole sector. So listen, without further ado, I'd like to introduce to update us on the CIMEC Atlantis projects, a Drew Blacksland from CIMEC Atlantis. Drew, over to you.
Thank you, Andrew, and also thank you, Lindsay. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm just going to take you over the next 10 minutes through an update for the MeyGen project. Obviously, it's been a fascinating last 10 years for us, and I'm really eager to show you the results so far. And hopefully that allows Andrew and the other people on this panel a bit of an insight into where we think the industry is going and what are the important markers to that commercialization. Just having a slight technical difficulty here. Here we are. So yeah, look, CIMEC Atlantis Energy today, we've grown enormously from our humble roots as a purely tidal technology provider. My division is now focused on that provision of tidal energy services and technology, and the CIMEC's broadening its strategy to acquire, build and own and operate a global diversified portfolio of sustainable energy assets. But for today, MeyGen project, the overview. MeyGen is one beautiful site up in the north of Scotland. It really is the crown jewel of the British tidal sites, and we've become very used to operating up there now. It's about a 3-kilometre gap between the island and the mainland, as you can see in that photo. And some of the fastest tides in the world come through there, and that's why we're harvesting that. We're very proud of that site, and we think it's incredibly important to the overall industry, and that we are always seem to be moving forward there and improving both cost of energy reduction and performance of the infrastructure. The turbines are out there now, 3 Hammerfest turbines and 1 Atlantis turbine, as you can see on the screen. They, I think the main thing that speaks volumes to me and the purpose of today around this photo is I've been in the industry a long time. I've been there since way back in the last decade when many tidal turbines had different guises. I think if you looked at this from an investment perspective, you start to see mean reversion of technology types. And we certainly agree that there are different places for different foundations and floating, and all these have a place in the industry mix. But for the MeyGen side, the subsea turbine, and you can see the Hammerfest turbine versus the Atlantis one, basically to the uneducated are the same device. And I think that's important from an investor confidence perspective. Very quickly, a boring SLD there, single line diagram, but there's the 4 turbines, subsea, all the individual converters and transformers, into 4.1 kV to shore through a horizontal directionally drilled, so that we don't have any beach landings. That was a permit requirement at MeyGen. And then obviously connecting then to the grid is 33 kV. The site characteristics are what they are. It's not the shallowest of sites. It's not the deepest of sites. We're in about 35, 40 meters. As you can see from that that drawing on the screen there, the site topography is not just one nice flat sheet of rock, and so that certainly gave us challenges, but also challenges that have helped us develop ways again of improving costs of all our equipment. Bit of a site, a better picture really that shows you. I think that this one on the slide you can see now is nice for me to see, because we've had a lot of experience with cables out there. I think when we started this, there was a lot of talk in the industry around cable stability. And obviously most tidal sites in the world are founded on rock or very stiff ground, because anything that's fairly loose gets scoured away. So therefore the traditional methods for wind farms and other cable laying where you would trench cables is not impossible, but certainly economically difficult. And so what we've learned at MeyGen, we spent a lot of money, a significant amount of money on modelling, drag forces, turbulent eddies, all that sort of stuff. At the end of the day, the lesson's always the same, that doing equals a lot more than modelling. You can't do it without modelling, of course, but by going out there and laying these cables, and particularly with the turbines that have cable tails, the Hammerfest turbines, we've learned what cables like to do and don't like to do out there, and some of the things we used to worry about that were major cost drivers in our models are not anymore, and that's great news. Happy to take questions on that in details later. The MeyGen site characteristics, again, we're onshore grid, fairly basic, normal substation setup, converters onshore. A lot of time and money went into the permitting of that building, so that it was aesthetically pleasing to the environment up there. And that is one of the draw cards of Tidal, is that largely the site obviously is the same as when you arrived as when you left. I think one of the key things that we've learned at MeyGen, and we've been doing for over 10 years now, and it's one of the cornerstones of my business, is understanding for the marine environment. We all know it's difficult. We all know that there's different ways of approaching it. But what we've learned, again, by doing is it's got to be treated with respect, but it's not as impossible as some people like to tell you. And it's driven innovative and clever ways of dealing. We can now install a turbine in well under 60 minutes. We can do more than one turbine on a deck. All these sorts of things were not seen as possible, and if I put them in my financial modelling 5 years ago, it would have been questioned. We've now done it, and I think that's really important. The other thing too is, there's a great picture there on the screen of 2 turbines being serviced. They can be serviced on the back of the deck. We did that last year. And you can see a fresh one going in and one that's come out for a checkup. And we were able to basically, I think on that day we basically serviced 3 turbines in a 5-day period, and had to take one back to the beach, but the other 2 were able to basically world first, out of the water, serviced on the back of a deck and back in the water within 36 hours. So this again was not seen as necessary possible 5 years ago. I think the main thing from this slide is, you can see the dates there. Is the process to get MeyGen 1A through to completion and into its construction phase was very long. It took from 2010 effectively through to 2018 before we got into that operational phase, with construction clearly starting in 2015-16. So, one of the key things for going forward in the roadmap is through that long and expensive learning process, we certainly know how to do it faster. You've got stakeholder engagement, lessons learned, all that good stuff that allows you to get the confidence in your backers to get on with things. Just a little bit of information on the array itself. As I said to you just before, we're now officially, MeyGen is officially in operational phase. Construction is completed. I think the results are fairly typical for new technology and any new installation. Is you have your early infant mortalities, which require servicing. Servicing is expensive in Tidal, and you can see 2018 was in that expectation ranges with all 4 turbines having to come out for a service. But as you can see since then, it's impressive. We've had no turbines out this year, touch wood, and all the data we're getting is showing that most of what we learned from the last 2 years was that traditional infant mortality, things that needed to be addressed have gone back into service and are now doing their job. So we're over 20 gigawatt hours now. That's tiny in comparison to wind. But I think when you look at the industry and where it's going, you start collectively adding the achievements of our other colleagues and competitors. It's building on that story. The industry needs to see gigawatt hours. It needs to see low maintenance cycles, improving maintenance cycles, as you see on the screen. It's certainly improving, all driving to a lower cost of energy. I think the other thing that speaks volume too is you know, the percentage of time availability over the end of the construction period, you know, range from, you can see there, from 52% as a worst case this past year up to nearly 97%, and I think the latest figures have got closer to 98%. That is again huge and unexpected in probably some of the cynical circles around Tidal. Getting that availability up and proving that these devices can be reliable and continue to perform subsea is critical to investor confidence. Last couple of slides. The other thing too, which is absolutely invaluable to this roadmap of future commercial development, is data, data, and data from real life. No longer analysing things through theory. Of course, that's always going on. Engineers will have to do what engineers do. But we've now got real data, real gearbox oil quality, temperatures. You can see those all on the screen. And when you look at that information, you compare it to your prototype design, you realise that you've over-designed everything, which is what you should do in a first turbine, of course. And that has a huge bearing on ability to reduce cost. And that is fairly typical of any industry. We're not inventing anything here, but we've now got the data to back that path. I think this last slide on MeyGen itself is just, I love it. It's, you know, a gigawatt hour in a lunar month. It wasn't a preordained landmark, but it's one we're quite proud of. I think, again, just to close really this short presentation, you know, we are constantly looking at the key to all this, and that's reduced levelised cost of energy, getting to a parity price, being able to compete various platforms. It has to happen, and it's the question I think in most people's mind is not how, but when. It's time, and obviously how is important. From our perspective and our ongoing subsea technology as opposed to other means of deploying, we are certainly now building on our success with installation. As I said, being able to wet mate, install these turbines, not have to handle cables repetitively, and be able to return quickly to dock, and probably during neap tides install up to 8 turbines a day. It's not unfeasible. Has reduced certainly offshore handling costs to, you know, to very low. We're also looking at multiple turbines through one export cable, which has been done in wind, and we're currently working with our partner GE on that. These have a huge bearing on our cost models for future arrays. And that's the last slide. Is really just a couple of pictures of our current Mark II design. Again, mean reversion. It's still basically the same looking device, but always improving. And there's a whole bunch of stuff in there that's come from our learning from the AR1500. And as on the photo on the left is the almost complete subsea hub that will go into testing hopefully soon. I've rushed that through fairly quick with my 10-minute time limit. Hopefully, Andrew, I've managed to stick to that, and I'll hand back to you.
Yeah, Drew, thank you very much indeed for that excellent run through of the MeyGen project. Some really interesting topics, I hope, for our attendees. The effect of technology conversion, which is emerging on investor appetite, the learning by doing, obviously on the back of the appropriate modelling, which drives innovation, and including things like on-deck servicing, all leading to lower LCOE costs and competitive positions being established with other forms of generation. Excellent, Drew, thank you. I would like now to introduce Marlene Butel, who will deliver her presentation update on the Sabea technology. Marlene, over to you.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Drew, for your presentation on the MeyGen project. So my name is Marlene Moutel. I'm a business development engineer at Sabela. And so my presentation today will be about the FAR project, which is our first commercial project for Tidal pilot farm. So I will not give like a real overview of what we are doing at Sabela, like just in details. I will mostly focused on the FAR project and on the next phase of our technology. So just for information, Sabela is a Tidal turbine developer, and we are based in France, as you have must guess from my accent. So to better understand the FAR project, you need to understand. So it's not moving, it is. You need to understand, so the first premises of Sabela values and vision of tidal energy. So to understand that, you need to understand what is Ushant Island. So Ushant Island is a small island away from the French Brittany west coast. So it's a small island of 900 inhabitants. If you had the chance to come in holidays in Brittany, you must go to this island. It's not pretty far from the coast, the main coast of France. It's like 30 kilometers away. But the main point about this island is it's 100% powered by fossil fuels, meaning that the island use diesel power plants to produce electricity. So there is no cable, like export cable, going from the islands to the French national grid. So this off-grid network is consuming 2 million liters of fuel per year to produce electricity. When you know how like green and lovely nature is this island, it's like a black spot on the picture. So bearing this in mind, and with our scope of developing tidal energy in France, Sabela has worked with Ushant Island to trigger their energy transition and move forward in the integration of renewable energy for this island. By knowing that just like a few kilometers away of the shore of the island, there is what we call the Fromveur Passage, which is known as one of the biggest currents in France. So it's like 2 kilometers away of the shore, which is not really far. And you can find in this area up to 4.5 meters per second of current velocity, which is quite high. This site is also quite suitable for the development of tidal energy because of the bathymetry of the site. So it's between like 30 meters up to, I would say, 70 meters deep. So this is a site that we have decided to choose to work on our first demonstration projects for our tidal devices. So the device that I will show in the next slide has been deployed 55 meters deep, approximately 2 kilometers away from Ushant Island shore. So a quick history to understand all the stages of development that we have gone through with Ushant Islands. So it's like a stepwise approach, which is taking much time because we need to, to move like wisely with the development of this technology, which is quite important and has like a great amount of difficulties and challenges to overcome. So the first major milestone for Sabela was in 2015, where we deployed D10-1000, which is a 10-meter diameter tidal turbine of 1 megawatt. It has been deployed for 1 year, for full 1 year, 12 months of immersion, and it was grid connected to Ushant Island, so it has injected electricity to the island grid. So this first year of immersions allow us to validate the technical demonstration of the turbine. So we did not have any broken things on the turbine, so the mechanical integrity was validated. And we were also able to validate the quality of the electrical signal. So all of our electrical conversion is embedded, so it's within the nacelle of the turbine. So we had 1 year of authorized period for the immersion. So at the end of 2016, we took it out. we have like 1.5 years to get a wealth of return of experience on the turbine. And then we decided to take it back into the water for a second campaign that will last for 3 years this time. This next phases of 3 years were most about getting to the commercial validation of the project to prove that we are able to have like a continuous power production and a full green injection. This is where we are at today, and so the next phase is expected for 2023 with the FAR project. So this project is a commercial project that we are working on with Accio Energy, which is a French utility. So this project will see the installation of the first French pilot farm, which will be 2 turbines this time, so not only 1, just 2. And this will be like the final stage for Ushant Islands, and like a major milestone for tidal energy in France. So this is a snapshot of what will be the FAR project for Ushant Islands. So it's not only a tidal project, it's a multi-energy project that aims to integrate 75% of renewable energy into Ushant Island, which is like for now 100% of fossil fuel powered. So the project will see the installation of 1 wind turbine of 900 kilowatts, 500 kilowatts of solar energy, like innovative solar energy solutions, with greenhouses, containers, floating solar and solar tiles, 2 tidal turbines, which will be installed nearly almost as close as where D10 is today. And the entire system will be coupled with an energy storage system, which will be provided by EDF. So the goal of this project for both Accio Energy and Sabela is really to showcase what we call the fuel-free islands energy model. So we are not only promoting tidal energy as a solution, we are more promoting like a full range of different and complementary renewable energy sources that will allow to have a production over there that will be complementary. So we are not reaching 100% of Ushant's energy needs with this mix, but the goal is not to, the goal is not to integrate more renewable energy sources to have more energy production, is more to shift the energy consumption of the inhabitants to make them in phase with the energy production. So it's more a work to do with the inhabitants than just like integrating more electricity sources. The commissioning of this project is expected for 2023, so in 4 years. No, 3 years now, we're almost in 2020. The period operation of the project will be 20 years, and so the main goal of this project is to decrease the cost of energy production on the Ushant Islands area. So far, the diesel generators are producing at a cost of 450 euros per megawatt hour. And so the FAR project with the multi-energy system will allow to reach LCOE of 250 euros, which is far better. So the FAR project will, of course, allow Sabela to move forward with our technology. And so we are not going to install exactly the same devices. There will be some major differences to improve the efficiency of the devices. So for the scope of the tidal pilot farm, it will be 2 D12 500 tidal turbines, meaning that their water diameter will be 12 meters and they will have a power capacity of 500 kilowatts. Still, we will have the embedded electrical chain. It's a choice that Sabela has made to prepare for the future more bigger commercial farm that will integrate many devices, and the devices will be connected to what we call a subsea hub that will mutualize the power from all the turbines to allow to have one unique export cable to the shore instead of one cable per turbine. But so far for this project, we will have one export cable per turbine going to the shore. It's not a difficulty here because we are quite close to the shore. We are 2 kilometers away approximately. So it's much easier to do one cable per turbine than just like make a subsea hub for only 2 turbines. The devices will still be on the seabed, and they will be held in position with the help of a gravity-based foundation structure that will be ballasted. We are still dealing with the modular architecture that will ease the offshore operations, meaning that the gravity-based foundation will still remain on the seabed for the 20 years lifetime. And if we do maintenance, we will only retrieve the upper parts of the device, so just only the rotor and the nacelle. And to finish, so there will be several environmental monitoring equipments, either on the turbine or around the turbines, to deal with all the monitoring of the environments and the subsea life that is mandatory for this kind of project. The final goal of this, what we call the fuel-free island model, is really to see how we can replicate this project in other areas of the world. So there is like a high potential for the same, I mean, not exactly the same, but equivalent project of multi-energy renewable energy sources for the Philippines, where you have many islands that have not an access to electricity like 24 hours, 7 on 7. Same for Australia, where you have like off-grid communities far in the north. Even for Indonesia, where you have like a lot of islands. And so there is many areas in the world where you have this kind of off-grid communities that are the need for a new energy transition towards renewables. So this is like the market that Sabela is focusing on today, which is the off-grid areas markets, which are similar to Ushant Islands. And that's all for me. I hope it was almost clear. Thank you very much for your attention.
Marlene, thank you very much indeed for an excellent presentation. For me, interesting things common to the routes that Ceramic Atlantis are taking. There's a degree of technology conversion, subsea hubs, similar looking turbines, but there's also differences, of course. It's a slightly different market currently with Tidal being a part of the generation mix, and that generation mix successfully displacing diesel, and also reference there to the possibility of using this project as an exemplar to build markets, to roll out the same project or similar in other markets. The involvement of utilities in France also very interesting for me. You know, given some of the work I do, particularly with colleagues in greenbackers in the marine sector to encourage investment. Very interesting. Thank you very much. What I'd like to do now, before we enter into a discussion phase, and encouraging you once more to get some questions in, is introduce to the debate the Christoph Harwood, who is Director of Policy and Strategy at Simply Blue Energy. And Christoph, I'd like you, if you would please, just to kick off this section, which is intended to be free-flowing among us and with our audience, just with an update on the hard work you and others have been doing to try and secure a support mechanism within the UK. Christoph, over to you.
Great, yes, thanks, Andrew, and thanks, Drew and Marlene. What struck me from those two presentations is the progress we're making as an industry in demonstrating that the technology can and will work. And I think it's really important that people continue to push that message, because there is still a sense among UK government that we are very new, young, basic technology. But clearly what we're seeing is, you know, gigawatt hours are happening, and we need to keep pushing that message through. What I'm focusing on as a member of the Marine Energy Council is a dialogue with government around bringing back some form of viable revenue support. A lot of you will know that this was taken away effectively in 2016 when it was a requirement that in the UK, tidal energy should compete with offshore wind. Now, offshore wind clearly is way ahead and had a long lead time into getting to its current cost base of 50. Well, we're heading towards £50 a megawatt hour, and we have made the argument all along to the UK government that this is not about cheap electrons. This is about creating for the UK a new industry that can create jobs locally, support local supply chain, but also export to the world. So I'm sure in France there's the same message going across as also is happening in Canada. And the question is which country can dominate this space? We look back on the wind sector and the huge success that Denmark had in developing that industry and effectively being the powerhouse, if you forgive the pun, for the rest of the world in that new sector. What we had to do is to grapple with a government that looks on low-cost power as being a critical part of its energy policy, and explain that we can meet their requirements, but we need a support to do that. Under the last government minister, there was the Green Growth Strategy, which said, can we demonstrate that we are going to reduce our cost of energy? And we've done that through a catapult report. They said, can we demonstrate economic benefit? We've done that again through the catapult report. And finally, can we demonstrate delivery of low carbon, which is clearly pretty simple. The issue then for the UK government is why they should pay over the market price as they see it for energy coming out of tidal power. And it comes all the way back to the economic benefits. When we looked at that in a bit more detail, we realized that one of the issues is that it was not seen right that the consumer should pay for the cost of innovation. So in the UK market, all the costs that are paid for low carbon energy go through electricity bills. And so a consumer has to pick up a tab, whether they're paying £50 a megawatt hour for onshore wind, whether they're paying £150 a megawatt hour for current offshore wind, or whether they're paying more for wave and tidal. So what we did was look at that and design a mechanism that took the cost of innovation off the consumer bill and put it through the tax system. And that is the Innovation Power Purchase Agreement. So that enables somebody to develop a project. 5 megawatts is the size of project we're looking at, because this is aimed at technology developers, not at large-scale project developers. And that 5 megawatts of power would be sold to an off-taker at a strike price over the market price. That then would be reclaimed over the tax system by the off-taker, so that it recovers it through tax rather than through the consumer. The other model we then looked at was 5 megawatts, small projects is all very well, but clearly we need economies of scale. And therefore what we need is to move into the CFD system, but we have suggested that there should be such a thing called the Innovation CFD. The Innovation CFD would be a ring fence of new technologies which would compete amongst themselves. And that would be tidal, wave, floating wind, maybe geothermal, maybe some of the advanced thermal combustion. That was received with some interest by BEIS, and is indeed part of an RUK submission to the UK government for floating wind. So those are the two strands of dialogue we're having with government. The IPPA is really something for Treasury. So we are hoping for a meeting with Treasury on this. The ICFD is something for BEIS and is something that all technologies are cooperating on together, and that will probably be led by RUK and others, mainly around floating wind, but bringing in tidal and other projects with it. I probably don't need to say a lot about the current political situation in the UK at the moment, apart from the fact that energy ministers and treasury ministers are somewhat distracted in dealing with people like us. Andrew, back to you for questions.
Christoph, thank you very much for that whiz through. There are other opportunities to get updates on that process coming up. There's a Scottish Renewables Conference, Marine Energy in Inverness on Monday and Tuesday of next week, and there'll be an update, I'm sure, during the course of that. Of course, we have to bear in mind that that particular element of our discussion today is a particularly UK-centric discussion, and the idea of market support, of course, is important to a degree as the industry moves towards competitiveness with other generation sources. Drew, Marlene, Christoph, thanks very much for your input so far. What I'm going to do now is hand back to Lindsay, who's going to update us as panelists with some of the questions that have been coming in, and then we can try and deal with those and comment on those in the next phase of our webinar here. So, Lindsay, could I hand back to you to update us on some of the questions that you've been receiving, please?
Absolutely. So the first couple of questions that we've got in are for Drew. So the first question is, what's the LCOE? And the second question is, how can the production of your technology be estimated? Is there any particular software or a model?
So the first question is always the $64 million question, and don't quote that as the LCOE. LCOE is, we believe it must, and all our modelling is well sub 100 pounds a megawatt hour. And we believe we can get to parity. The question is more about time, and time is a bigger factor there because it requires volume. As someone else said earlier, you know, industry volume is important to this. I think that came from Christoph, and that's going to govern when we hit those LCOE targets. But the model, our internal models for our Mark II system, and then our larger system for volume array is certainly pointing to the right numbers, well sub 100 pounds per megawatt hour. I didn't quite understand the second question, Lindsay, if you could repeat it.
Absolutely. So it may just be the way the question's worded. It's how can the production of your technology be estimated? Is there any particular software or model?
No, that's relatively easy these days. It's fairly known, simple formula for rotor area, and we've got now absolutely empirical numbers for the efficiency of both the rotors and the offtake system. So we can model pretty much, you know, I get a phone call a week from different sites in the world saying, the water's tearing past my lighthouse, please come down here and put a turbine. We can quickly model depth. The main parameters, maximising rotor side is key, and obviously it's an optimal balance between rotor size and overall cost and the rating of your turbine. But ultimately, I can tell you that an 18 metre rotor, 1.5 megawatt turbine in a decent flow site such as the one in France or MeyGen is going to pump out about 5 gigs a year. It's fairly simple math.
Drew, thanks for that response. And before I go back to Lindsay for another couple of questions, observation from me would be, you know, in all my travels, the various places I go, you know, there are really encouraging signs in the growing belief that indeed the sector can get down to competitive LCOE. I mean, I do think it's significant that Enel Green Power announced the signing of the MOU with EMEC and you know, in Naples this week, and you know, the fact that they are very keen on including ocean energy generation including tidal generation, in their scoping for what they see as key technologies to help the world deliver on its climate change targets by 2050. They were very clear about that, and they do not believe that wind and solar on its own will get close to delivering the climate change targets that the world requires. Clearly, they will be key elements, but they are supporting and putting a lot of effort into scoping out those other technologies, and they are including these. So whilst I agree that getting LCOE costs right now is a downward curve, and it's hard to estimate. My own sense is that from all I see and all I read and all those I speak to, that we are definitely on a road to parity and competitiveness in that regard.
Yeah, I agree, Andrew.
Marlene, would you, before we go back to Lindsay for further questions, would you like to give us your thoughts on the route to competitive LCOE and how you and Sabea see that?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, LCOE, as Drew says, always like the $1 million questions. So one of our main approach is still like the stepwise approach to move from demonstration project to pilot project, and then to bigger farm of multi-devices. I think that a good way for us to have devices put into the water is also to integrate all the renewable energy sources to the project, in order to de-risk the project by integrating more mature renewable energy sources. This is one of the major points that we are trying to put in the forefront for the development of other projects, not only in France. The second point will be the need for market support, which is clearly a way for us to be able to have projects. So we clearly need like revenue support, like the one we can find in Canada, for example. So it's more like a good equation to find that will allow us to move forward the cost decrease curve.
Indeed, thanks, Marlene, and very supportive, of course, of the market support mechanisms at this stage of the sector, because they play a role in allowing the sector to deliver for those communities that require jobs, that require factories, that require clean power, and using a replacement of diesel to help us on that route, and becoming part of hybrid systems that deliver clean energy in whole island communities is clearly an important part of that. Lindsay, could I go back to you now, please, and you perhaps narrate another couple of questions that have come into you?
Absolutely, yep. So we've got a question in, which is, what do you think are the most adequate instruments to finance the commercialization of tidal farms?
Adequate instruments to finance tidal farms. Well, I don't mind leading off on this one, but I welcome input from all panelists, of course. The range of adequate instruments demonstrably include grants, equity, and debt, and there are agencies, not least the ones I'm most familiar with, of course, are here in Scotland, but there are others, particularly in Europe, where blending all these different types of finance together and shaping them is what really works. And of course, in Scotland, we have other mechanisms in other sectors, particularly the waste sector, to try and deliver that. So for me, it's all about matching the type of money to the type of project. So where you have a secured income stream by way of PPA, by way of support mechanism, you can use that to leverage debt, of course. Some of the debt may require to be shaped to fit the income profile, and may require to kick in only post-commissioning or as it takes place. And you can get instruments that have conversion options attached to them, so they look a little bit like debt instruments, but can convert into equity. So I think there's a lot of flexibility required. I do think that flexibility does exist in the marketplace, and certainly having been involved as one of the people, along with a representative from Atlantis, actually, is only two individual representatives on the expert group of 65 people that helped with the Innovation Fund in Europe. I can say that, you know, my view and the view I think of the group was the steps being taken to shape that fund, to make it fit, to make the money more usable are very, 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 very encouraging. So I don't think there's a single instrument that will work. I think it's a blend. And Drew, I'd welcome any thoughts you have on that.
Yeah, Andrew, well said. I don't disagree with anything there. I think the key thing you mentioned is it's horses for courses. The more gigawatt hours we've got, the more classic finance becomes available. We're heading into one of the most interesting times in modern history of negative interest rates soon. So debt is as cheap as it's ever probably been in my lifetime and further back. So that debt, cheap debt, doesn't come without proper warranties, balance sheet warranties, all the things that are hallmarks of a matured industry. Goes back to the previous conversation that, of course, any government support or private wire or other mechanisms that can be done to help get the gigawatt hours up to achieve that, you can see why this is a circular discussion. But I agree with you. There's probably not much more for me to add except to say that from our experience, that mixture of those three finance mechanisms is still very much alive and accessible.
Indeed, Drew, thanks for that. Yeah, Christoph, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, I think it's important that all of us in the industry make it clear to government that whilst we recognise that grants are helpful, that there are good small projects like Sabella are doing, and I see what Drew, you've announced today in Alderney. In the end, if they want a viable, strong industry, that is not enough. What we need to do is have the support that other sectors have so that we can get device after device, project after project in the water. And in the end, those financing mechanisms, you know, whether it's debt, equity, whatever it is, will come to nothing if we don't have revenue support. So revenue support is critical to get the industry up and running if we don't want to remain or become a sort of niche activity.
Yeah, I might put that slightly differently. I agree with the point you're making. I hasten to say, Christoph, but I think, you know, in terms of maintaining momentum of the industry, I would be saying support mechanism is really important. You can see the momentum being maintained in those jurisdictions where support mechanisms are part of the picture. And Marlena, just before I bring you in to comment on that, the other observation I would make is that, you know, the Innovation Fund I referenced is a very big fund and deals with a lot of sectors and a lot of industries. You know, and I can say that the very big industries with big businesses and big balance sheets, chemicals, cement, various things, were in these discussions and seeking to secure grant finance, introduce things like clean burning new furnaces, simply because whilst they could borrow money on their balance sheets and even self-finance, they wouldn't get internal authorization to do so until these new technologies had been demonstrated. In other words, we're no different from any other industry in making this ask and seeking to maintain the progress that the industry has made by the reinstatement of some mechanisms that were there and upon which early steps were taken and which were then withdrawn. I speak particularly obviously of the UK. But Marlena, it'd be interesting to know what your thinking is about financing mechanisms and whether there's a particularly in-country perspective from France on any of that, Marlena.
Yeah, so I must agree with all the comments that you have made on the financial structure of projects. So it's all about grant equity and debt, and knowing that the tidal energy sector is still not mature enough for investor and for securing debt. It's quite difficult sometimes to get like the financial closure for projects. But indeed, we must and we are pursuing our effort to work with the government to get revenue support, so FIT or CFD, And so yeah, we are doing the same work here in France with the government to move forward and have like call for tenders for project, for example, in the Rat Blanchard in Normandy. So it still takes time. It's still not defined yet, but I mean, we are still working on that, and all the developers and all the project developers and Tidal supplier are defending this subject. So we are doing the same work in France than the one you are doing in the UK, but mainly with the difference that we are less. I mean, there is still less actors for the tidal energy sector in France rather than the UK, but still.
Okay, Marlene, thank you very much for that. And just before I go back to Lindsay, perhaps for one more question, we can have a quick look at it. I'd just like to also commend the work that Ocean Energy Europe are doing throughout Europe and with the Commission to try and leverage the case for those support mechanisms throughout the European theatre. Lindsay, we could perhaps fit in just one last question, if I can ask those who are responding, and I include myself, to be brief. Could you provide us with one last question, please?
Absolutely, yeah. So we've had a few very specific questions in for both Drew and Marlene regarding their projects. So we'll do sort of a follow-up after the webinar for those to be answered. But one of those was for Drew. So how do you feel about competing with floating offshore wind for an ICFD, assuming there is some take-up on this concept by BEIS?
Absolutely love it. Let's do it.
I think our position on tidal and floating wind competing is that we need to make sure we have like for like. So to have a 50 megawatt tidal project competing with a 500 megawatt floating wind isn't going to help the sector. You know, we have to ensure that BEIS realizes this is about an industrial strategy, not about brutish competition killing off one to benefit another. So one of our
I agree, Christoph.
Yeah, so one of our proposals that will go into the ICFD, there's a consultation on the next CFD round kicking off in the autumn, is that there should be banding within CFD rounds. And you know, I think it'd be interesting to see 100 megawatt tidal compete against 100 megawatt floating wind. And that's what we should be thinking about and making sure there is a level playing field.
Yeah, Christoph, thanks for that. Marlene, would you like to comment on Sabea's appetite to compete with floating wind?
Yeah, I would join Djibo's comment. So it will be like just a question of scope and how do you compete with a more mature industry. So it's always like the comment that people are making when they compare the cost of tidal energy with like offshore wind today. So it's just like a question of scope. I don't have any much comment on that.
Okay, well, Marlene, thank you very much for that. I think the answer to that particular question, probably from all the panelists, could be summed up as "bring it on," as Drew said.
Andrew, can I just make one thing? I think just for transparency, Simply Blue Energy is developing floating wind projects, so we are involved in that. We are involved in lobbying for wave and tidal. So hopefully I can see across the board, but just for transparency's sake, I am working on all three areas. Yes,
well, indeed, and I too have exposure to a number of areas, so you know that's good of you to make that point. Well, look, everybody, thank you very much for attending. I'm going to hand back to Lindsay Coulson in a minute just to wrap up. But before I do so, I'd just like to put each of the panelists on the spot and give us a quick thought on what you'd like to see in the industry, any comments you'd like to make before we close, anything you'd like to tell our audience. King for a day, what would you wish for? And as you started, Drew, I'd ask you just to make a comment and let's see if we can get you what you need.
Yeah, king for a day, what would I wish for? I think is collective one direction, and I think it's far more there than it used to be. As one of you mentioned earlier, the political environment is a tad messy at the moment. Let's get that sorted and get moving in one direction. We believe categorically in hitting parity, and that requires a common goal and a roadmap. So let's do it together.
Excellent, Drew. Thank you. And Marlene, Sabea, king for a day. What would you wish for?
Yeah, I think that the main goal for the industry today is really to get like devices into the water. We are not much competitors into the sector, so it's just like we have like a common vision for the development of projects, and we need to work together, and we have all the keys in hand. But yeah, that it's all about getting the support that we deserve. I will add, but I think that Lindsay would say that at the end, but ITS in November would be a great opportunity for all of us to discuss together and to have like a good chat in person to discuss about the next phases and how we can work together.
Excellent, Marlene. And Christoph, I'm going to hand back to Lindsay now. I'm going to take it that your king for a day would be a decent support mechanism to help the industry. Forgive me for not allowing you to go in, but I'll cut Lindsay off if I don't hand back to her now. So thank you, everybody, for attending. Thank you, Drew, Marlene, and Christoph. And Lindsay, can I hand back over to you, please?
Absolutely. I'd just like to quickly sort of wrap up and say thank you to all of our fantastic panelists. Sort of as Marlene just mentioned, this webinar was produced from New Energy Update and with regard to the International Tidal Energy Summit, which is taking place this November on the 11th in London. So just sort of a quick reminder about that. Early bird savings end for passes to attend on Friday the 20th of September. So do visit the website on the screen or do get in touch with me as well if you have any questions about that at all. But yeah, thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in. The recording will be being sent out next week, so do look out for that. And as we had so many brilliant questions in as well, we will be doing sort of a little follow-up, hopefully, with both Marlene and Drew, sort of very specific questions about their projects. So do keep an eye on your inboxes for some more information on that next week. But otherwise, thank you. Thanks again, everyone, panelists and listeners. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the webinar.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.